Gesso is a staple in my studio. I honestly can't create without it. Today I will show you 7 different ways to use gesso that you might not even realize you can do. Truthfully, this one product does it all. The 2 most common uses for gesso are prep and cover. Most artists use gesso as a base to prep their surfaces for all the media they will add on top. In art journaling, I like covering my pages with gesso because not only does it prep my pages, but it covers any previous paint or color that might have transferred or seeped through from another page. Once gesso is dried, I know I can easily do the next step, which in this art journal is to collage some tissue paper for texture. It is better to glue the tissue paper or any paper onto the background with gel medium, as it can glue and protect the thin paper. However, I've seen artists use gesso to glue pieces of paper for texture. Since gesso is made of a plastic polymer, it will stick to it, but I don't usually recommend it. The third way I can use gesso, and one of my favorites, is to apply it as a paste through a stencil. It is best to use a heavy gesso for this technique, so it's thick enough and doesn't run under the stencil. You will get a beautiful 3D design, and once you add color, you will see the texture pop through. However, this layer must dry really well. For these types of art journal pages, I love adding watercolor-like mediums, so I'm using Lindy's magical powders, which become bright watercolors when mixed with water. I love blending different colors together, and the reason why I like using watercolors is because the gessoed surface partially resists the water. This is great because 1, the stenciled pattern stays whiter than the rest of the background to give some contrast, and 2, I can easily clean the excess from the background with a wipe. That way the color stays around the focal point, which in this case is the stenciled area, and I'm able to keep some white space in the other areas to create contrast. The gesso still gets partially tinted, but I love that, as it looks as if every element on my spread blends beautifully together. The next use for gesso can become your best friend, as it can fix many mistakes you might have made on your spread. For example, I can see that here I glued the tissue paper in an area I didn't want it. And I also noticed that the white space got tinted too much. All you need to fix it is to add gesso. You can apply it with a paintbrush or a sponge dauber like I'm doing here. You can apply it as thin or thick as you want, depending on how much you want to cover. It truly works like magic, and you can add several layers if you really made a big mistake. Then dry it really well, and you can spray a bit of water to reactivate the color around the edges and blend them together so there's no harsh lines. I also add some script stamping to blend the edges even more. This evens everything out, and if you make a mistake stamping, just grab a little bit of gesso on your finger and cover the mistake. Before showing you the next gesso application, I add a layer of Distress Microglaze, which is a waxy product that protects the color so it doesn't mix with any of the gesso I will add afterwards. I can add the gesso with a palette knife, which is another way I love to use gesso, as it can create the most amazing organic texture. I sometimes do this step at the beginning of a spread if I want to have a lot of paint-like texture. I can even dilute the gesso with water to make a liquidy paint and use it to add splatters. Believe it or not, gesso can be used instead of white paint as well. Or you can mix it with other paints like acrylics, micas, or the powdered paints I used before to create your own colors of paint, as some colors cannot be found. I'm mixing gold powder and use it to create gold splatters in the background as well. Since the paint is already liquidy, it's easy to add the splatters or even paint a couple of embellishment feathers in gold that I can add as a focal point. However, you can mix the magicals directly with thick gesso and make a heavy body paint instead for other uses. And if you're like me, who often makes mistakes with mixed media, then watch this video right here where I share with you different tips on how to avoid and prevent the most common mistakes.